Hello and welcome to the MMO development class. So today we're going to, continue where we left off with last session and start taking a look at actually using CGS to apply some of these style properties to our GUI elements. So we see right here that we have a basic UI built. It's also bringing in a style sheet as well, and we are using the CGS builder to put together some, I guess what you could say kind of looks like markup, but it's really just straight up C# code that behind the scenes constructs all our elements and applies all of our styles and all that fun stuff. So what we need to do now is we need to start to translate our GUI, or our I don't know which one you are. I have too many Visual Studio windows open. We need to go ahead and translate our computed styles into GUI styles. So a GUI style is just an object that represents all the different properties that we can apply to Unity's built-in GUI system. So if we jump into our CGS GUI builder class, which is responsible for building the markup, quote-unquote, we need to pass in computed or constructed GUI skins into the individual methods, such as we have a label right here. And if we look right in here, we have a GUI layout.label invocation. Inside of that, we can pass in a GUI style in one of the parameters. So we really need a way to figure out how to translate from a computed style into a GUI style. Now, unfortunately, this gets very, very complicated, especially with some of the features that I want to implement with CGS. So I'm just going to be taking things just a little slow, try to start working on the easier of the attributes to translate, and we'll work our way up into the more complex ones. So what we need right now is we need a way to go from this, we have this CGS style class, and right now it's just a wrapper around computed style. The idea would be for this CGS style to do some computations and other adaptations for our GUI style from our computed style. So I guess we can go ahead and start off with that. I think the most logical place to put the code responsible for building a actual GUI style should be maybe in CGS style, maybe outside of it in a different class. The way I originally implemented this was with a GUI style adapter, but that got a little crufty after the amount of different logic required in different areas, because there's a bunch of different places where we need to put in code just because of the complexity of some of the stuff we're trying to do. So let's think for a moment. I guess we could start off with a GUI style adapter, basic GUI style adapter class, and move on from there. And we can have that do some caching and stuff like that for our textures that we need to generate. So I'm going to go ahead and create a GUI style adapter class. And our GUI style adapter class is going to have a public, we're going to have a GUI style, which is what we're trying to adapt method. And the adapt method will take in an iElement as well as an iComputed style. So how will this be used? Well, what I'm going to do is I want my GUI style adapter to be kind of a singleton. Like I said, I'm going to want it to be used in or used for some caching of our textures and stuff like that. So the most logical place to instantiate it would probably be in our CGS environment. I'll go ahead and expose it through this interface for now. I don't know. So for now, we'll just have a GUI style adapter, and we'll go ahead and implement that member, and I'll bring him up all the way to the top next to our other properties, and then I'll instantiate him on the awake method. So now we have an adapter and we have our method stubbed out. I can go back into our CGS GUI builder and see how we would use that. So in our GUI layout.label, and if you guys recall, the label function or method is used for pretty much everything other than divs and scrolls. Divs and scrolls are the only two elements in CGS that are allowed to have children. Everything else is implemented in terms of labels or things like buttons or text boxes or whatever once we get into the inputs. So to use it, I would pass in the result of an adaptation from a computed style to a GUI style right here. So I would say something like GUI layout label, and then I would pass in environment, so CGS environment dot instance dot adapter dot adapt, passing in our element, which we have right here in this closure, as well as our style, which is going to be style.style. Okay, so we do need to also implement some forms of caching as well for our individual GUI styles that are returned. Now, this also is where things get a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into my GUI style adapter and I'll implement a cache at this level. I think that makes sense. So I'm going to add a private read-only dictionary of type string and GUI style called style cache. Now our style cache does need to be invalidated upon changes. So this is going to be interesting. Actually, let's not worry about caching right now. There are so many things that I'm going to have to be dealing with other than caching. We'll worry about caching once we get a better idea about how these elements are actually going to be converted into GUI styles. Because then we have, if we implemented caching now, we would have to worry about how to invalidate that cache, and because the location of all this code could potentially change in the future, and most likely will, I'll leave that up to, I'll leave that decision for later. So I'm going to say var style equals new GUI style, and so, or I'm going to call this GUI style equals new GUI style, and GUI style has pretty much everything that we need in the form of these properties or fields or whatever to implement our stuff. So let's start off with some simple things. Let's do alignment. Now, if you recall, there's alignment is, I believe, built in as a property type. We have our text align property. So I need a way to adapt from a text alignment to what Unity expects, and Unity expects a text anchor enum. I'm actually going to implement these different conversions between the different enum types in the form of extensions, and the reason I'm doing that is because, well, it would just clean up our code a lot in case we needed those conversions later down the road. So I'm going to add an extensions namespace, and I'm going to add a Unity extensions class, make it static, and let's do it public. So we're going from a text align to a text anchor, so we will have a public static text anchor, and I'm going to call most of these methods to Unity, and then it's going to take in a text align, which I'm pulling in from my CGS engine property types value objects. So that, and then I'm going to switch on that. I'll generate all my switch labels, and I'm just going to, well, this is going to be fun. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, see, it's a bit of a pain because I don't want any dependencies in CGS on Unity itself. It's going to be a bit of a pain to do these conversions. I know it looks like just a lot of repetitive code, and it is, but we have to do that in order to keep our CGS engine away from Unity as much as possible. So I'm going to go back into my adapter. I'm simply going to say GUI style alignment equals style.getProperty text align property dot value dot to unity. Now, actually, what am I doing? We can just go ahead and use the object, whatever it's called, thing, syntax. Okay, so next up, let's do our active. Now, an active is a GUI style state. So we're only going to deal with active. I can't remember how I handle this, but let's not worry about active. Let's do normal next, because normal is going to allow us to set our background and our text color of our normal stuff. So I'm not going to worry about the background just yet, because the background will require resource loading. Let's go ahead and do the text color. So the normal text color is going to be style.getProperty color property dot value, or sorry, dot color, and then we have to convert our color value, which is our CGS value object, into Unity's color object. Now, to do that, we need to do some basic math, and that's because Unity expresses our colors as floats from 0 to 1 for each channel, whereas in CSS we express them as bytes from 0 to 255. So let's go ahead and do color.toUnity. I know that method doesn't exist yet, but it will, because I'm going to jump back down to Unity extensions, and I'm going to write another method. So public static, it's going to return a color, a Unity engine color, and it's going to be called toUnity, and it's going to accept in a color value from CGS, and then it's simply going to return a new instantiation of our color, our Unity color, and we'll have to do the conversion from our bytes to our floats, which is very simple to do. Let's just do float that dot r, and we need to just divide it by 255. That'll give us a number between 0 and 1 that will allow us to do our stuff and things. So we have our B, 255, and then we have to do our A. Now our A is going to just be that dot A, because in CSS, our A's are actually floats from 0 to 1. Our alpha channel is just a float between 0 and 1, so we don't have to do any conversion to handle that. So now if I jump back to our GUI style adapter, we now have our text color on our normal state working. Okay, next up, let's deal with, so we have active border. Border is a rect offset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say style.getProperty border offset property dot, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an extension method from our quad numeric properties into Unity's rect offset properties. So I'm saying to Unity, and I'm going to jump back into our GUI extensions, and I'm going to add a public static rect offset to Unity this quad numeric property base, that, and simply going to return a new rect offset with that dot left, that dot right, that dot top, and that dot bottom. So now we can use this extension method for other things such as paddings and margins. Okay, so after our border, let's go ahead and do our clipping. So our clipping returns a text clipping. I believe the way that we did that was we had a property called, what did we call that guy? We called it text clipping property, which returned a text clipping. So we need to convert from our CGS text clipping into Unity's text clipping. So I'll do style get property text clipping property dot value dot to Unity, and again I'm going to jump back into my Unity extensions. Hold on, we have a small problem. Yeah, we need to convert these guys into ints, don't we? Or is it the other way around? Wait a sec. Oh, derp. These are all number values, so I'm going to do that dot left dot value, that dot right dot value, that dot top dot value, that dot bottom dot value. There we go. And it's still complaining, probably because value is a float. So we have to convert from a float to an int. So we'll lose the decimal precision, but that's hardly needed when we're talking about pixels. Okay, so next up we need our public static, and we need to return a Unity engine.text clipping. And it needs to be called to Unity, and it'll be this. And the text clipping that we want here is going to be the CGS one. Then we'll say switch on that. We'll generate our labels. For clip, we'll return clip. Makes sense. Overflow will return overflow. Makes sense. Okay, so if we go back to our adapter, we now have clipping. Okay, what's the next property? We have our content offset. Now, our content offset is a vector 2, and I believe that's expressed with our offset property, I believe. So we just need to convert from our offset property to our content offset. Now, this is where things are going to start to get a little annoying. Now, with border, I don't really care about things like percentage values, but with content offset, we could theoretically have percentage values. For now, I'm going to ignore those because, again, once we start talking about percentage values, we're going to have to make our work with our code a little bit to get the concept of percentages built in, which I'll wait for later. So our content offset is going to be a new vector 2, and it's going to return a x and a y. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to nab that property out of it. So I'll say content offset equals style.getProperty offset property. And then our content offset will be set to a new vector 2, passing in content offset.x.value and content offset.y.value, assuming that everything is in pixels for now. Next up, we have our fixed height and our fixed width. Now, we only want to set the fixed height and fixed width if there is a height and a width set, and they're not set to none. So I'll leave that out of the object initialization because we don't want to worry about that. I'll also leave font out because we are not loading in resources yet, but we can put in the font size. And the font size is going to simply be our style dot. Actually, this is another instance of our size is defaulted to none. Because it's defaulted to none, actually it's defaulted to null, which I don't want that to default to null. I want size to be defaulted to a number value of 0 and a number unit of none, specifying that hasn't been set. Because we need that conditional logic, I'm not going to worry about that being implemented right there either. Font style. Font style is one of these different values, which again is going to require some logic, so I don't want to worry about putting it in the object initialization syntax. Next up, we have image position, which we do have an image position thing. I can't remember what it was called. It's called, yeah, image position. So I'm going to say style.getProperty image position property dot value dot to Unity, which will go from a CGS image position to a Unity image position. So I'll go ahead and implement that extension method. So we'll have image position to Unity, this image position, I want that. I'll go ahead and switch on that, generate our case labels, and these just happen to line up because that's the way I designed everything. Okay. So we have our image position now, so now we can look at our margin. Margins will be easy for this moment, but will become a little bit more complex later once we introduce percentages. So the margin I'm going to set to the margin property dot to unity. Remember, a margin is a rect offset, and a margin property is a quad numeric property, so we can use both that extension method. I'm not going to worry about any of those methods or those properties. Next thing I want to do is the overflow, which again is just a quad numeric property. So I can do dot to unity. Now we have our padding, which is again is a quad numeric property. And then we have our stretch height and our stretch width, which I won't worry about. Then we have our word wrap. And our word wrap is going to be pretty straightforward because it's Boolean. We are expressing it as an enum in CGS where we have break word and normal. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to set word wrap to get property word wrap property dot value equals break word. So that takes care of word wrap. Okay, so we still have a couple properties that we need to go ahead and set. First of all, I need to detect if they set a width or a height. So I'm going to go ahead and say var width equals style get property width property dot value. If width dot unit equals pixels, then I'm going to say GUI style dot fixed width equals width dot value. And I'm going to do the same thing for height. Okay, so those are our widths and our heights. Now we need to deal with our font style. So I'm going to go ahead and say var font equals style get property font property. First, I'm going to say if font dot size dot unit equals points, that means they set the font size, which means we need to set the font size. So I'm going to say if GUI style dot font size equals font dot size dot value, and I'm going to have to cast it into an int. Next up, I'm going to say if font dot is bold and font dot, or let's see, if font is bold and font is italic, I'm just going to write this out. It just has a bunch of single nested if statements. So if it's bold and it's italic, then we're going to say GUI style dot font style equals bold and italic. Otherwise, if it's bold, then GUI style dot font style equals bold. Otherwise, if it's italic, we'll say GUI style dot font style equals italic. Otherwise, and I'm pretty sure this is the default, but let's go ahead and just be explicit for whatever, we'll just say normal. Okay, so next up, what do we have? We don't need our active, we don't need our fixed height or our fixed widths because we did those later. We need to load our resources for font, but we'll worry about that later. Font size and font style are set. Hover doesn't need to be. All the ons don't need to be, and the stretch height and the stretch width do not need to be. So at this point, I can just go ahead and say return GUI style. So now if I jump back into my, I'm going to go ahead and close all these documents. If I jump back into my CGS GUI builder, we have our labels implemented now, but now we need our divs and our scrolls to pass in the appropriate style. So for our divs, I'm going to go ahead and say our style, we're setting the flow, we're doing the action. So for beginning a horizontal, beginning vertical, I'm going to say var GUI style equals CGS environment instance adapter adapt for this element given style. And then I'm simply going to pass GUI style into each one of these methods. Next up, we have to implement our scrolls. So if we go back down to our scrolls, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. And then I'm going to say begin scroll, and I'm going to pass in the GUI style. Now, a thing about scroll bars is they actually inherit the direction they're going in from the parent div. A suggestion I got of CGS actually from people who actually use it is to allow us to override that with the flow property. So what that'll be a pain. Let's worry about that later. Anyway, so now if we jump back into Unity, nothing should really change, except let me jump back into the markup of this. Let's see here. We have a class called test. Let's go ahead and select all the H1s under test and give them a different style. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to jump into my style sheet, and I'm going to say dot test H1 color red. And nothing happens. Okay. So let's stop this and start it back up, see if it just didn't. Nope, it really doesn't want to be red for our H1s. Let's see what happens if we just say all H1s are blue. Nothing happens there either. Is it even loading this? Yeah, it is loading that. Huh. Okay, so let's figure out what's going on with this. If I jump back into... Actually, I'm going to try a different property, not color. Let's do a different one. Let's give them a width of 500 pixels. And we had a sharing violation. This can be fun to fix. Are there any other things that we could apply to it? What other properties do we even have? Let's try giving it a padding of 5 pixels, 200 pixels. Okay, so it's pretty clear that we're not actually getting anything adapted for us. So if we jump back into our cascading... Oh, you know what? I forgot to build. Okay, well... Here we go. Okay, so now we have some red. I can go ahead, let's see what happens if I set these to like RGBA 000.5.1. Alright, so our opacity is working just fine. Our left is not supported value for this property, and I'm getting a million of those errors. I don't know why. What is the supported value of that property? Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's do middle left, I guess. So if we go ahead and say text align middle left, that works. We can do middle center, which I think is the default, middle right, upper left, Okay, that looks cool. We can do a width of 100 pixels, 300 pixels. Actually, let's not set the width of the H1s. Let's set the width of test itself, which is a scroll view. I have a width of 300 pixels. And, well, that's not what I want. For some reason, it's applying. Okay. For some reason, it's applying my padding to the children within my things, which isn't what I want. Let's go ahead and just style my H1s first. Actually, let's style page wrap H1 and page wrap H2. Let's give these a font size of 14 points or 18 points, padding of 0px, 5px, or sorry, and the text align of left or middle left. Okay, so looks like that's all working just fine. The only issue right now is my my scroll view has a class of test. Oh no, the div has a class of test. And for some reason, these paddings are being inherited all the way down to my H1s, which I don't think is the behavior that I'm really expecting at all. Yeah, it's cascading for some reason. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on collapse. I'm pretty sure my computed style... Oh, whoops, that's totally the wrong project, isn't it? I'm pretty sure my computed style has a two-string, right? Computed style does not have a two-string. It's my rules that have two strings. So how would I debug this? Well, I would debug it by writing a test. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write a test under my, how about environment test or something? No, how about my property test? Because I think that's where it's failing. So let's write a test for this. I'm going to say test public void cascading margins, or margins should not cascade. I'm going to say var sheet equals parse CGS, paste in my entire style sheet, and then let's go ahead and figure that out. So to construct this, I'm going to say var test equals new element. The element's going to have an element type of div. Doesn't need anything else. Then I'm going to create a h1s equals enumerable dot range 1 to 10 dot select new element with an element type of h1, a parent of test, and then I'm going to say for each of our h1 in h1s h1 or var style equals sheet build style for element h1, and I'll say style dot get property margin property dot left should be 0. That's funny. Should be 0, but found 0. That's because it's a left dot value. But according to this test, these aren't cascading. So either I'm doing the test wrong or it's not cascading and it's a different issue. So let's go back to Unity and throw in some debugs out. Let's jump back into my GUI style adapter. I'm just going to say, debug log blah equals blah, where blah is element dot unique ID, and the other blah is going to be my GUI style dot margin. Okay, let's see what Unity has to say about this madness. Well, apparently Unity has nothing to say about this madness, and that's probably because I forgot to build. Here we go. Okay, stop this. Stop it. Okay, I just totally froze Unity. Well, that's not good. Oh, moved for a second. Okay, well, let's just let Unity do its thing. Let's look at our logs. Our H1s all have... So our div.test has a margin of 50-50-50. Our div test scroll has a 50-50-50, and our div test scroll H1 has a... So it is cascading for some really dumb reason. I don't know why. Hold on, let me go ahead and nuke Unity. Yeah, I don't think it's going to recover from this. So I would want to say that this is a CGS bug. But if it is, how do I reproduce it? Blah, blah, blah. So our unique ID GUI style.margin, our margin is being set from our margin property, which is being set from style. Style is being passed in to adapt in our div, and it's also being passed in from our label, which we're passing an element. So for some reason, let's see here. Why would it do this to me? I don't know where the bug is, and I don't think the bug is in CGS itself, actually, because based off this test, we are closely replicate. Let's go ahead and just replicate the entire DOM. Page wrap is a new element with a type of div and an ID of page wrap. Underneath page wrap, we have our header 1, which is new element type of H1. Then we have a header 2. Both of these are parented to page wrap. Then we have let's see here. Then we have a div called test, which we have right there. Then we have a scroll. Also, this is parented to page wrap. Our scroll is just a scroll. And then our H1s are parented to scroll. and our H1s, I'll go ahead and do a .toList. What are you complaining about? Whatever. I don't know. The elements. I don't really care what the name of that is right now. Shut up, ReSharper. So, our margins are still not cascading, which they shouldn't. I guess that's a good thing. Okay, so maybe it's a bug with the environment. I'm going to go ahead and move this test out of here, and I'm going to place it in my environment test. And the reason I'm doing that is because it could be my caching code that's all borked. So I'm going to create an environment. Then I'm going to build a style sheet. Pass in a style sheet compiler.compile. Pass in basically all of this. Then I'm going to build all of my things, but I'm going to say build style for element. I'm going to pass in page wrap, because that would be the first one to be built. Then my header 1, then my header 2, then my test, then my scroll. So my header 1, my header 2, my test, and my scroll, and then I would do that for each one of those guys. Okay, well, my environment chart isn't breaking. My environment does do, or my engine does do caching, right? Yeah, it does do caching. And that's the only way that I can see that this would be confused. Okay, so what do you guys see? Why would... Oh, great. I just crashed Unity again, didn't I? Oh, no I didn't. Okay, so why would my margins be cascading even though my unique IDs are obviously different? This is getting stupid. Alright, let's try something else. I'm going to try to, let's set, okay, so test the color of red. The red doesn't cascade, but the margins and the paddings do cascade. Text align does not cascade, so it looks like just paddings and margins. Why would it just be paddings and margins? Okay, so what about page wrap? If I applied a margin to page wrap, yeah, margins are cascading the entire way down. And it's not doing it at the GUI style level, it's doing it at the computed style level, which is part of CGS. Why would it do this to me? Get style for element. Get style for element. Engine.build style for element. It's... There shouldn't be any reason why this should ever happen, basically, is what I'm saying. So we have our label. Our label gets the style for element from element that was created in create element. Element instantiates a new element, sets the parent appropriately, applies all the attributes, pushes it to the stack, invokes the action, pops it from the stack. I mean, it's all fairly straightforward. And we saw earlier with the logs that the unique IDs are being set appropriately. The only other thing I could think that this could be is a reference issue. What happens if I reset the margin? So I can reset the margin at a lower level if I wanted to. But could be a reference issue. Let me go back to my test. Let me go ahead and say var margins equals new list of margin properties. I'm going to say margins add dot get property margin property. So I'm basically going to do this for everything. Blah blah blah. Margins add and build style for element. Oops. Style get property margin property. Then I'm going to our unique items equals new hash set of object passing in my margins, and then unique items dot count should be margins dot count. There we go. Okay, so we're having some reference issues where we're reusing some references where we shouldn't be. Now, why are we only finding 6? Is it coming from these H1s? Oh, right. Well, it will come from these H1s because these styles are all the same technically. So that... So we're not having a reference issue. It's the implementation of margin. It's a quad numeric. Ooh. Oh. Hmm. Hmm. Hmm? No. Number values are immutable. Yeah, they're completely immutable. There's no way that number values should be able to be changed. So that can't be a reference issue. It's still concerning, though, why this test passes, because it really shouldn't pass. Because this is essentially the exact same setup that I had before. The only difference is that happens multiple times. Nope, that doesn't affect anything. So let's go ahead and go on break while I think about this. This is a really bizarre bug. I'll be back. Alright, we're back. Well, while I was on break, I realized that I actually wrote this test wrong. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this test right. I'm going to get rid of this for loop. It's irrelevant now. That's not the problem. The problem with this test, there's two problems. First of all, I never actually applied the correct class to this element. This should have a class of test. The second problem is I never set the parent of my scroll to the test element. So now that I've done that, we should get a failing test, which is good because that means that the problem is now isolated. So the issue is that our margin property is cascading for whatever reason, and I have a couple theories as to why this could be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a reference out of my margin property for test. So I'm going to say our test style. Actually, I'm going to clean up this test. This test has a lot of code in it that I don't think is necessary. I'm going to get rid of these guys. I'm going to get rid of the scroll too. I don't think the scroll is affecting the problem here. And then I'm going to clean up my actual CGS a little bit, and I'm just going to do this because we really want our test to just be representative of the single problem that we're trying to fix. The reason I had all that code before was I wasn't quite sure where the problem came in. I think at this point we have a actually, we can simplify this even more. I can just say var h1 equals new element, new element. We'll type h1 parent test, var test style equals var h1 style equals hn dot build style for element h1 or test style dot get property margin property dot left dot value should be 50, whereas h1 style dot get property margin property dot left dot value should be 0. Okay, so this test should hopefully still fail, and it does. Sweet. So we've simplified our test a lot, so there's not a lot of ugly code. So now what I'm thinking is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to alias out both my margin properties. I'm going to say var test margin, and then I'm going to say var h1 margin. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say test margin should not be same as does a reference check. So test margin and h1 margin should not be the same reference to an object. So if this assert fails, I can actually remove the other two asserts. Derp. Okay, so if the first assert fails, then we know we're dealing with a margin issue. Or not a margin issue, a reference issue, which it doesn't. So we know that the test margin and h1 margin are two completely different references. So that definitely gives us a good starting point with how we're going to work with this. So our test margin is 50px, 50 blah, blah, blah. Our h1 margin is 50px, 50px. But they're not the same object. So if I go into my immediate window and do test margin equals h1 margin, it says false. And that's exactly that. Okay, so we know that they're not the same reference, which means that for some reason, oh, you know what? I think it could be. I think it could be a selector problem, a selector thing, selector words, trying to say words, not doing so well. let's go back to our end. What should I call this test? I think we're so us with nested object. No. Element. No. Child element should not match parent element selector. Okay, so our selector is going to be, oh great. Well, I want the selector to be .test. So it's going to be a new class selector with test. And we don't need a parent because we don't have anything there. Okay, so then I need my two elements again, these guys. And so here's how it should work. So that's my selector. My markup looks like this. So selector matches test should be true. But selector matches h1 should be false. Okay, so we've now isolated the problem down to the selector engine. Good thing we have all these selector tests, otherwise I would be terrified to alter the selector engine this far down the road. So if I go down to my selector engine, which is going to be under abstract selector, so we have a contains match method. So what's happening is our element, our force match, oh right, our force match should always be true at the beginning of the chain. That's the problem. Because the force match is false, remember how it walks both these linked lists up? Because force match is false on the first thing, what it does, the reason that it matches this is because it says, okay, does H1 match this selector? No. Does H1's parent match this selector? Or no, it does it the other way around. It says, it starts with H1's parent, and that matches. So it's actually the other way around. Oh, great. Words. Words are hard. I wonder if I just mash my face against the keyboard for a couple hours, if I'll fix this bug. So let's go back to our selector engine. What we need to do is, at the end of it, okay, that's what it is. So if selector pointer is null, then we return true only if the element pointer is null. Or if the element pointer if the element pointer becomes null, we do return false already. So that doesn't really make any sense here. I'm going to swap these two assertions around so that I can debug my selector engine a little easier. Let's see which return statement is responsible for making this return true when it should return false. Blah, blah, blah. It does not match. Or it does match. That's good. We want it to match the first one. But because there's nothing left in the selector, we return null. But the element pointer still has another element in it. Okay, so we want to return element pointer dot next does not equal null. And I just broke all of my selectors. Okay, let's try this again. No, I don't want to run it. I want to debug it. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, right. See, Boolean logic is very difficult. We want to return true if it's null. And, hey, look, we just have a bunch of passing tests now. So that means if I go ahead and compile this, hop back into Unity, and hit play, we no longer have the margin bug. So now if I go ahead into test and I set a margin of 50, so let's do a margin of 10, the child margins do not get affected. Alright, so does everybody understand what's going on? Okay. Okay, so we have a big swath of functionality already implemented at this point as far as our adapter goes. We're not going to be dealing with texture generation today because if you guys recall, with Unity itself you can't actually create borders or background colors, but with CGS you can, and the way I did that was with texture generation. That's going to have to be like at the start of something. So I'm trying to think if there's any other tiny issues we can deal with today. I think something we could go ahead and work out are the different some more elements. Actually, first of all, I want to set some more sane defaults for my property types. My text align, I don't like the way it's it's centered by default. So I'm going to set the default of my text align to middle left. I think that makes sense. Okay, so let's go ahead and add in some more elements. So right now we don't have any input elements. So let's go ahead and toss those in, I guess. So we have our divs, our scrolls, our labels. Let's go ahead and start adding in other things. So we need a text. A text is going to take in a ref string text and a params of iElement attributes. We need a password with a ref string text and a params of iElement attributes. I'm going to create an overload for password that takes in a string mask character, which I'll just default to star. So we have our text, our password. We need buttons, so it's going to be a Boolean button. Takes in a text and a params of iElement attributes. We need our repeat button, which our repeat button takes in a string text and a params of iElement attributes. Then we need a toggle, which will take in a ref boolean on string text params iElement attributes. Am I missing anything? We have our text, password button, repeat button, toggle. Are there any other ones that we want to implement? Let's just see. GUI layout dot. What do we have here? We have sliders. Sliders might be fun. I'm not even going to touch the selection grid. So we have a horizontal slider and a vertical slider. Oh yeah, these get into fun little things. Problem is with our sliders, the sliders have multiple GUI styles. They have a GUI style for the slider itself as well as the little thumb thingy. So I'm trying to think here. How would we handle that? Well, we could use pseudo elements. Or just use pseudo classes, I guess. Yeah, that might be fun. Let's go ahead and implement sliders. So for a vertical slider, we need our value, our left value, and our right value, and then 2 GUI styles. I'm actually going to just implement one slider, and I'm going to have the flow parameter be responsible for determining if it's vertical or horizontal. So a slider. For our slider, we need a ref float value, a float min, a float max, and a params of iElement attribute attributes. And I think that'll be it for today. So let's go ahead and get these implemented. I'll jump back into my my GUI builder, whatever it's called, and I'll tell it to implement all these members I just added. So now we have a bunch of members. So you have text, password, password, button. This password is going to be implemented in terms of the other one. I'm just going to do password, pass in ref text, a mask character, which actually needs to be a character, not a string. Blah, 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 blah. Pass in a asterisk, and then pass in attributes. Okay, so for our text, what do we do for our text? Well, we just need to really create an element. So I can say create element, element type of input. Nah, I'm going to specialize it and do text. I know that isn't actually the proper thing for HTML, but this isn't HTML, this is CGS. Attributes, element, and then we're going to do text equals GUI layout dot text field, passing in text, and then passing in a GUI style. The way that we're going to get the GUI style is by saying var style equals, how do we do that? We just did that. Okay, seems simple enough. So that's how we get our GUI style. Then I'm going to pass that into here, and that should be it. The only issue, of course, is that we cannot use refer out inside of closures. So I'm going to say var temp, or sorry, var temp text, or no, what am I going to do? This is dumb. I can't brain today. Var temp text equals text. Then I'm going to say temp text equals that. And then I'm going to say text equals temp text. There we go. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing for passwords. Just copy and paste that. I'm going to go ahead and, so password field needs to mask character. We are going to be having to fix up some of this stuff as far as all this copy and pasting. The problem is that we have to invoke a different method on GUI layout each time. And as far as generating the style, of course, that's going to change as well. But, you know, that's okay. Buttons. Basically the exact same thing, but we don't need a temp text. It's going to be GUI layout dot button. We're going to pass in our text, and then we're going to pass in our GUI style. And I'm going to say var on equals false, on equals return on. Now, repeat button is going to be the exact same thing. Actually, for some reason I completely forgot the actual difference between a... Oh, whatever. Ooh, also, thanks for noticing, everyone. I need to change my element type. Change it to password, change my button to button, change my repeat button to repeat button. Then my repeat button is going to just do repeat button, and that's really the only difference. Toggles. So a toggle, well, just basically does the exact same thing. Let's see here. Okay, so a toggle, we're just going to create another element. I'm going to call it a toggle. Why'd you do that? So for the toggle, I'm going to say GUI layout dot toggle. I'm going to pass in my value, which is on, so I need a temp on equals on, return a temp on, on equals temp on equals, sounds like I'm saying something completely different right now, doesn't it? So we need our text, our GUI style. Alright, so now that we have our toggle, now our toggle's interesting though because we want to be able to style it differently whether it's being or whether it's pressed or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a concept of a new pseudo element or a pseudo class. I'm going to say if temp on, then element dot add pseudo class on. And since elements can have as many pseudo classes as they want, then that's all good. So that way we can style a toggle depending on if it's pressed or not. Okay, so next up we have the slider. This is gonna be fun. It's not actually. We need our temp value equals value. We need to create an element. I'm going to create a slider, passing in our attributes, passing in a closure, and then I'm going to say value equals temp value. Then I'm going to say basically this. Then I need to get the flow property out of my GUI style. So GUI style dot get property flow property. now and now I'm getting my flow property. Yeah, sorry, it's been a long day. So let's see. I do if flow property dot value equals horizontal, then we want to do a GUI layout dot horizontal slider, passing in my temp value, so it's actually going to be temp value equals that, passing in my min and my max and my GUI style. Otherwise, we're going to use a vertical slider. Oh, right. And now this comes into the thing that we have to do with the multiple elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a pseudo element, but I'm going to use pseudo classes to implement it because syntactically they're pretty much the exact same thing. So I'm going to create a new element. I'm going to say var thumb element equals new element of element type thumb with a parent of element. No. Wait. No. Yes? No. Or, actually, I don't have to do any sort of pseudo stuff. Let's not even worry about that. because that would require that I had to clone this element, and then it would just become this huge mess, and I don't want to deal with that. So we're just going to create a thumb element, so then I can go ahead and do the same thing right here. I'm going to go ahead and say var thumb style equals CGS environment dot instance dot get style for element thumb element, and then I'm going to say var thumb GUI style equals CGS environment dot instance dot adapter dot adapt thumb style. I have to actually pass in the thumb element for that, don't I? And now I can pass in the thumb GUI style into the thing that does the stuff. And what are you complaining about? You want a computed style, so I need to do thumb style.style. Okay, so here's our stuff. What happens if I do that? That looks kind of ugly, but you know what? I'll just go ahead and leave it like that. So, yeah. There are our sliders. I think don't scroll bars also have different GUI styles? Because oh yeah, they have our horizontal scroll bar and our vertical scroll bars as well. So while we're here, we might as well do that. Our horiz scroll bar equals new element, and that's going to be a horizontal scroll bar element. So h scroll bar, and then we can easily use an element selector to select it right out. So we'll do a, let's just spell it out. We have our horizontal scroll bar. Or no, let's leave it default for now, just because we don't have background images yet, or background anythings yet, which means that these styles will just look really ugly. Same is true for the thumb. Anyways, let's go ahead and test all these guys. I'm going to go ahead and compile. And we have a problem here because value cannot be used in this context because this set accessor is not accessible. Let's go ahead and do a... Whoops. Oh, great. I'm going to create an overload of enum property base that takes in a default enum value. Then I'll just write that in terms of this value map default T. There we go. Oh, what are you complaining about? Really? It's telling me to introduce optional parameters? I think that's the first time I've ever seen it tell me to do that. Huh. Whatever. Let's go ahead and use default parameters, I guess. I guess because it's protected, but then again, this is a public class. The reason... Well, yeah, the constructor... Well, no. You're technically not supposed to use optional parameters for anything that's public, but whatever. So I'll go back down to text-align property, and I'm going to pass in middle left. Okay, so now let's jump back into this, and let's see about it. That's doing it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just do 5 elements here. Let's do a private string text equals blah, private string, what am I going to call this? Password equals blah, private bool toggled equals false. So let's do g dot, let's do a text. So we'll do ref text. Let's do a password. So you can already see that that's a whole lot less code than you would have to write when using GUI layout directly. I hate GUI layout. Ref toggled. Toggle me. Then let's do a slider. Although the slider is going to look like crap, but whatever. Private float slider value. Min 0, max 50. And then let's wrap everything up with a button. And just to make it the button like actually do something, I'm going to have like show form. And then I'm going to say if show form. I'm going to say g.button. Show form. Whoops. Show form equals g.button. Show form. Okay, so let's see what happens. Show form, I click on show form and nothing happens, actually. That isn't quite what I wanted to... Oh, dirt, because obviously button only works on that frame, doesn't it? I'm stupid. So if button show form, then show form equals true. There we go. And then let's go ahead and invert this just to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so here's our form. So there's our text box, and there's our password box. Let's go ahead and style my text. Let's give my text a color of red. That's nice. Color of blue. Sweet. Let's give our password a margin of 5 pixels. How about a padding of 5 pixels? Oh yeah, margins don't work on passwords, do they? They should work on text. Yeah. This is one of those stupid Unity things. Margins don't work on passwords. It only works on text. That's wonderful. So let's do our toggle. I'm actually going to do toggle on, color is red. So now when this toggle turns on, see how it turns red? And you can see what the code looks like right here. It's just toggle colon on, color is red. Now our slider isn't showing, and I don't think I'll be able to get the slider to show, because even if I do slider where's the thing? Slider is a slider. We need a thumb underneath the slider. Yeah, I don't think there's any way I'm going to have to get this to... I guess I could give it a padding of 100 pixels. Although that won't do anything because there's nothing underneath it. But anyway, so the most important thing for me is this toggle button, because that's using our pseudo classes to handle that. So yeah, we got headers, we got a scroll view, which the scroll view, you can't really see anything in it right now, but if I went ahead and did scroll and I gave it a height of like 50 pixels, we still don't see the scroll appear. Well, that's dumb. I don't know. We'll figure that out later. But yeah. Point is, we got buttons, text, toggles, passwords, scroll view that doesn't work anymore. I don't know why. Let me see if it's something simple. Did I just no? Alright. Then we have repeat buttons, which I can't remember exactly what the difference between a repeat button and a button is. I know I'm a terrible person. Let's go ahead and print one out and see what happens. G.repeat button. Whoa there. And we have a repeat button that does nothing. I don't know what the default styling of a repeat button. Actually, let's go ahead and just do a GUI layout.repeat button. Let's see what happens. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, repeat button is just a button that continuously passes in true into the thing. Right. Okay, well, that means that's fine. Now we can see the sliders being styled now because I gave the slider... Or no, I didn't give the slider anything. Oh, yeah, the slider's taking up horizontal space. But if I changed the flow to horizontal, or... So that's it with the flow vertical, but if I change it to horizontal... Then you see it gets smaller. Okay, so yeah. Really, as far as CGS goes, the only things that are really left are going to be positioning, which is going to be a real big one, and texture generation. I think we'll handle texture generation next week, because that's going to be a little bit simpler than our positioning code. Our positioning code is unfortunately going to necessitate us tearing some stuff apart. But fortunately, there's not a whole lot of code to tear apart at this point. I mean, as you can see, that's the wrong Unity project again. As you can see, all we really have here is this 157-line file. And then, of course, our CGS GUI builder, which is, this is just a lot of repetitive code out of necessity. So I think that just about wraps up everything now. So yeah. I guess I'll go ahead and let all you future people go. See you later.